Buonasera. Come voi sapete, oggi, today it's a snow day, and as a matter of fact, there is no snow anywhere, but New York City public schools are closed, and as a consequence of that, NYU is also closed. So last night, this morning at 6, we had to ask for a special permission to offer you this event, despite the meters of snow outside the door. And I'm very glad we did, because your presence here is a testimony to the importance of this event. The thing I told the NYU executive vice president, who was in charge of saying yes or no, said, I believe this is the most important event that we are doing this year, so we cannot possibly cancel it. It worked, and I'm strongly convinced that you are in for a really special evening. First of all, I would like to thank my staff that, despite the fact that for NYU today, they could have stayed home because it's basically a holiday, they all reported for work to make the event possible. So please, would you give them an applause? It doesn't happen all the time in many places. It happens at the Casa, and I'm delighted. I'm so proud of the work they do. And the staff includes my colleagues in the administration and also the students that work for us. For them too, it would have been much better to stay home and do their own thing. So thank you very much. But of course, my biggest thank goes to Mujah Maraini-Melehi for being here tonight to bring us personally her film, and to Dacia Maraini, that, as many of you know, is a sort of a regular guest of Casa Italiana, more or less with the end of the winter, today, and the coming of the spring. Dacia arrives from Italy, and every year it's a discussion about a book she wrote or any other topic that we want to discuss with her. And you have quite a selection of videos with recordings of previous engagements of Dacia Maraini here at the Casa. I would like to mention one that was not a public one, but many of you know that Casa started producing in-house a series called Parole Parole, from the famous Italian song of the 60s. And we invite guests, friends, students, professors to give us a word that has to be an Italian word that can be rare, very common, impossible to translate, or a word that for any reason is particularly dear to the person that presents it. And we have about 70 or 80 now of these words. And I really encourage you to take a look, because they normally last about 1 minute. So in 1 minute, you learn an Italian word. It's a lot. The word is in Italian, but the explanation is in English. And when I asked Dacia Maraini last year to choose any word she wanted to present to our public via the internet, she picked resistenza. And at first I thought, I'm gonna present it, and then I said, no, go and look it up, because you will understand the very close connection of that word resistenza that Dacia Maraini explains very well and with a lot of passion in that 1 minute video on our website, and this film that we're seeing tonight, a film that Mujah has worked for many years in preparing, and you will see the great results that she has achieved, because this is also a story of resistenza that runs in the family, I have to say. And as we normally don't say much about a movie before you have a chance to see it, but I think it's important that the director of the film comes and tells you just a few key elements of this movie for you to pay attention to. And then I invite you to stay here, and the people that are upstairs in the library, thank you for being up there watching the film. You might try at the end, if somebody moves and leaves, to come downstairs so you will be able to participate more directly in the conversation. So stay with us. But before we start the screening, I would like to invite you to please welcome very warmly Mujah Maraini-Melehi.
Grazie. And thank you for being here, yes, despite the snow and everything. There are a few people I'd like to thank who are here this evening. People who contributed to our Kickstarter campaign. And the Kickstarter campaign was for to include Basil Twist's work, the Dogugaeshi. You will see Theater of Screen, Japanese Theater of Screens. Now Basil is in Rome because he's a fellow at the Academy, but we have his wonderful mother, the incredible Lynn Twist, author of Soul of Money, who's here. Thank you for being here. And we also have one of the musicians who contributed to the soundtrack, Michael Hashem. There he is. He plays the saxophone in Cheek to Cheek. The rest, all the music, it's the only one, right, that's not a Sakamoto. Well, there are a couple other ones. Anyway, Rishi Sakamoto is our composer and actually gifted us a piece, which is a very, very generous thing that he did, because this is an independent film. You know, he's an Oscar winner of soundtracks and everything. So I wanted to thank him for this. And I just wanted to say that the voice you will hear, the narrating voice, is my grandmother's voice, who managed to live long enough to finish this work. She passed away at 102, and so what you hear is a 100-year-old woman telling us her story and reading in English. Well, the film is in Italian and English. It goes back and forth. It's subtitled, for those of you who don't understand Italian. And she reads from her war diary. And this is the only witness account that we have from one of those camps. So this is a very important document. All the photographs are my grandfather's photographs, Fosco Maraini. Some of you may already know his work. And all the drawings and the paintings are Topazia, my grandmother's. And you will see they kept many diaries together, and you'll see a lot of those, a lot of that material in the film. Am I forgetting something? I would like to... The puppets, the photographs, the narrating voice, the music, I think you pretty much I think we covered everything. And I just want to say, this is a very intimate, very personal work, and it has to do with my family history, but it really goes beyond the personal, because I think it's part of our collective history, and you will see why. So thank you very much.
Please welcome Mujah Maraini-Melehi and Dacia Maraini. And has also joined us here on the stage, David Forgacs, who is the chair of the Department of Italian Studies here at New York University. And he's also an expert, among many other things, of documentaries. He's currently teaching a course on documentaries, David? Not this matter. A graduate course on seminars is one of the most successful courses that we offer in the Department of Italian Studies. And David is an historian of contemporary Italy with many interests. And I'm delighted that he accepted to be involved in a conversation with Mujah and Dacia. We have a rather extraordinary fortune, first of all, to see this film. It's only the second time that it's presented in New York, if I remember correctly. And it's the first time that there is the director and one of the protagonists and witnesses, I think, more than protagonists. So that's why what I meant when I was trying to explain to the NYU people that despite the non-snow, we had to have this event here tonight. And the first question is, it seems that this memory that was narrated within the family, but was also kept within the family for many years. And it's as we know from Primo Levi, it's a common syndrome of survivors. They don't want to talk about what they felt. And Ms. Maraini, you talk about that in your book, Bagheria. I think it's the first time that in one of your literary work, you spend time describing that experience. That is a book that comes quite late in your career.
Yes,
so
at the same time, I really never wrote the book on that. I will do it. I promised
And
myself.
we'll invite you back for
I
that.
promised myself that I will do it before dying. I have a lot of material, and naturally there is a book by my sister, her mother, by all the diary by my mother, and a lot of the book of my father also. So there is a lot of things. But maybe I will write about what was my feeling, what I felt as a child, and how it was such a strong experience that I think I would write it. Yes, I have to do it.
But in Bagheria, for the first time, you mentioned this experience, and you give some episodes. And
some also poems, but not extendedly, not completely what it has been. But that happens, you know, with those who have been in concentration camps. Sometimes they take 60 years to remember, to say something about it, because you tend to cancel and forget.
Topazia says, you hear her voice saying, "We were only happy to forget. We were only happy to forget." It says it all.
And so what, instead, you didn't live these things directly, but they were part of your family patrimony, these shared experiences.
I think any child of any survivor understands this. I'm sure there are people in this room who have been through something similar, because there are silences, I say in the film, memories are erased because there are silences, but there are wounds that sort of make it through the generations. My need to tell the story, to understand the story, was also to understand my mother.
That seems to be the one to have the more complicated relationship with Japan of all the members of the family.
Originally, the project was taking Mom to Japan, and that didn't happen. And I waited really until the very last moment, because she kept saying, "Well, maybe," and then it's true that Topazia was not doing well, and of course she had the greatest excuse. She said, "Well, I can't leave." And I said, "Well, maybe I shouldn't leave." And then Topazia said, "No, you go, and I'll wait."
And she did wait.
And she did.
And Ms. Maraini, you have been to Japan several times. Your books are translated into Japanese.
Yes,
you're very well known there. It's a country that you go back to. So it's a very different approach from your sister. What do you feel when you go back to Japan? What are your... I imagine there is a series of different contrasting... Tell us something about it.
I never hated the Japanese. On the contrary. And that I learned when I was in concentration camp, that the police people, the policemen, the four of them who were there, they were sadistic. They were really sadistic. I remember, for example, that they used to stay on a small balcony, and they used to eat in front of us who were dying of hunger, and sometimes they throw us, for example, a head of a fish or a potato or something. And they were happy to see the children, not the grown-up, they wouldn't do it, but the children running there to rush to take this head of a fish, you know, something that they throw away just to have something to eat. So, and they were laughing. So you understand, it's sadistic. That is really sadistic. Yeah. But in the same time, I knew that the Japanese people were against. And as I was a child, I used to go, and as I said in the film, I used to sometimes to slip from the concentration camp, go out and work for the peasants to pick potatoes or tomatoes. And then they gave me one potato or two tomatoes, and I go back and we divided everything. And I felt that they were very with us. They were against the war, against the policemen. No, they could, for example, denounce me because I was going out. It was forbidden, very, very dangerous for me to go out. But they never did it. They were with us. So I felt that there was a difference. I was a child, but I felt that there was a difference, a great difference between the people of Japan and the policemen and the military mentality. You know? There was a great difference. And that's why it was I felt that they were with us. They were with us. They felt sympathy and come si dice? Sì, solidarietà,
Empathy and solidarity with you.
for us, and that it has been very important because I never arrived to hate the people of Japan.
And it's also something that came from your parents.
No, for example, my come si chiama? La tata, la nanny, my nanny, our nanny. It was the only person who came to the camp, and she was beaten because it was forbidden. She brought something to eat, but all our Italian friends never came. They disappeared.
The ones that signed in favor of the Social Republic of Mussolini, obviously.
Yes, not all. No, not all of them. But they just stay up aside. They didn't say anything. Maybe they were against, but they didn't say. They wouldn't say it, especially knowing that they were risking to be in prison. So they would say anything. But they disappear from our presence. I mean, they didn't risk to come to the concentration camp. Instead, the Japanese nanny came, Morioka-san, no? And she came, and she was beaten for that. That this is a great sign of solidarity.
Absolutely. I just want to re-emphasize the key event from which everything stems. When the Maraini Alliata are asked to sign a statement of allegiance to the Social Republic of Salò, that was the puppet state that the Nazi implanted in northern Italy, and Mussolini was the head of it in 1943, they had a choice to sign in favor of that or not to sign in favor of that. It was a signature. Nobody would have thought about that after the war because many did. They decide not to sign separately because they separate them. To me, that's
my mother cares a lot about that because usually in the newspapers or in the book they said Fosco Maraini decided not to, but and she was anyway. And she wanted that the people know that she chose it alone without consulting the husband to say no.
It was more difficult because they had to guess also what the other one was.
Yes.
But you know, it's such a principled choice, knowing that the consequences for themselves and for their family from that signature that probably would have been forgotten, but still they remain faithful to. It's a very unique thing. It doesn't really happen that often. In Italy, there were how many university professors refused to sign that? Right. 12 out of 1,200. So, and they were in Italy. And
thank you for saying that.
It's because I think it's very important, and we need to remember it.
We were only 18 persons in this camp. You see, 18 Italians who didn't sign. All the others, they signed.
And they were away from home.
It does come out in the film that was a choice that had really serious consequences. I think you say in one of the interviews with Mujah that it was a courageous choice, but a very idealistic one. And of course, at the end of the film, you say that your grandfather asked your grandmother forgiveness. Ask your mother forgiveness for what he'd put the children through. So in a way, he takes responsibility for that choice, even though your grandmother equally signed. And there is some sort of trace of that having been a very hard decision, and one that clearly was possibly they didn't exactly know what the implications of it would be. They didn't know what was going to happen.
She said we didn't know what the consequences were.
Yeah.
But I want to say something. It was not a political decision. That's very important. They were not politically engaged. They were against racism, because this was the fact, the important fact. In that moment, Europe was like, come si dice, ubriachi, drunk of racism. No, a lot of people like thought that racism was
They didn't agree with the racial laws in 1938, right, which is why they left in protest.
That's the reason for which they didn't want to sign. It was not a political, I mean, they didn't belong to a party, or it was absolutely against racism. And I remember that my father used to tell me when I was 6 years old, remember that the racists don't exist. They were people, there are
Cultures.
nations, there are cultures, but not races, you know. And in that moment, it was, now it seems very normal, but in that moment it was, now we are going back. Racism went away from the door, coming back from the window, unfortunately. But in that moment, it was something very important and very courageous to say, because people were also describing and saying, theorizing racism. That's the thing, that there were superior races and inferior races. The superior races had the right, the right to supreme or to supreme or to submit and also to anche di rubare. No, to depredate. Come si dice depredare?
To steal, to take away from the inferior races.
That's the problem also. That was a great problem. The superior race had the possibility to, had the right of depredare is a very strong word in Italian.
Yes. Depredation.
Depredation, but the verb is very strong in Italian. It's not just stealing; it's to take away with violence.
It was like
plunder.
looting, plunder.
Plunder.
Mujah,
Yes.
I want to ask you about the style of the film. It's very
Yes.
striking, this use of animation, the opening and closing of screens, the use of puppets. I think particularly powerful, I think, is the sequences with the wooden marionette,
Yeah.
who is
Well,
the
that's
sadistic prison guard. And that's very beautifully lit as well. So a lot of thought went into those scenes.
Yeah.
Can you say a little bit about the choice to use that? Because it's an unusual choice in a documentary to use a lot of animation and imaginary sequences like that.
Well, every time I thought about telling the story, you know, we don't have photographs from the camp, from the prison. We don't have. I didn't just want to have talking heads. In fact, my grandmother doesn't even. I decided not to interview her on camera because I would just have these long conversations with her. And what I was delighted to hear you laughing because she's wonderful. She's very spontaneous. I would go to her house, and we would just sit and have tea. And I felt that it was a lot better to just get her spirit through her voice. It wasn't important to see her. I think you really get her that way because she was very vain and very beautiful, and so whenever I put the camera, she would, you know, so she was quite, yes. So I thought I really need to get, I need people to get who she is, you know, this very sort of visceral, funny. Okay, so then I thought, well, we're going to have to show something about, you know, the prison camp, etc. And I'm not a fan of documentaries where you have enactments because I feel that, you know, they're always kind of phony with actors pretending to be, you know. And in fact, I love the finger, the hand, because that really works. It works. You feel it, even if it's wooden, you know. So here comes. I'm talking about Basil Twist. Who is a master puppeteer, a great, wonderful artist. I had read an article in the New Yorker, and just absolutely fell in love with him. And then it was incredible. My collaborator, my co-writer, Deborah Belfort de Furia, whose role was very important, and I can talk about it too later, because she was on the outside and I was so in it. I really needed someone to kind of help me with that. And she had a friend, a very dear friend, who knew him. So we contacted him and we worked with him. Now the Dogugaeshi, what you see, the theater of screens, that's something quite exquisite and wonderful that is already a production of Basil's. And it's a theater, it's a 17th century theater, Japanese theater, that he went to Japan to research because the Japanese have forgotten about it. This is also something that you know, Japanese are rediscovering. And not only did he do the research and build his own theater of screens, he restored their theater, right? I'm saying that right. And so I thought, what a wonderful way to talk about memory, because memory is sort of like that. You know, you go past the screens and then it closes up, you go back 3 steps, you move, you know, so the layers were perfect for that. And then of course we talked together with Basil about how to depict other scenes, and so you see he calls him Stickman. It's, you know, the marionette. And the great thing about theater, and I knew from the start that it had to be theater, because there's something epic about it, and because when you're dealing with puppets, you project your own imagination. So they're talking and they're very specific with the details, but you don't have to see it exactly the way it is. And you know, Stickman is all emotions, is everybody. He's the policeman, he's my grandfather at one point, he's hunger, and those are all things that we can connect to and project our own, sort of like when you read a book, you make your own film in your head, you know? And so that's why and I feel very, very fortunate that we could work with Basil. Yeah.
And Dacia was mentioning, it's a documentary, but it's also a piece of poetry. And all these elements, the animation is beautifully done. The puppets also add an element of poetry to a very real story, but at the same time, it's also paying homage to Japanese culture, the screens that move. So the fact that it's such a story that could very well be used like to incite some feelings of hatred or resentments or revenge. There is nothing of that, because there is nothing of that in the narrations of Dacia, her sisters, and your grandmother. So I think that the fact that within a film that talks about a dark moment in the history of Japan towards other people, and Italy too, because we're not doing any better, but that there is an homage on your part to that beautiful culture, to the aesthetic sense of Japan. It's a particularly refined point of humanity.
Which is something I think Dacia can agree. It's the Japanese aesthetic has always been part of in our family. Do you want to talk about that? You know, we always. My grandfather, of course, made us appreciate Japanese culture. And his love for the culture is something that was passed down to me and now to my children.
The first experience of literature and theater, I remember going to the No Theater, for example, excuse me, the No Theater, for example, I remember having been there, and so it was the first culture that I was nourished by was this culture, and the food is culture also. So the way of living and eating and speaking, it was our culture. Because my father was anthropologist, no? So we were not there as a tourist or as foreigners, but we wanted to stay inside, to integrate. That was, and I was very often dressed as a Japanese girl, so I felt as a Japanese little girl. That was, I spoke better Japanese than Italian. Yes, that's right. And then it was a sort of trauma when I came to Italy, and I think art have helped me, literature, books, to make this change from one culture to another. Has been very important.
One other question really to you about the Mujah, about the process of making the film. I think it's very unusual to have a film. There are mother-daughter memory films where the daughter interviews the mother, but you have daughter, mother, grandmother, aunt. Yes. Also other people who remember, the historian you interview who tries to get the interview with the camp guard who refuses to say anything. So there are kind of refusal to remember, and then there's different kinds of this. And I think that is very unusual. I think it's one of the things I found most powerful about the film is you elicit also new stories. I mean, as you said, Stefano, Dacia's already recounted this in Bagheria, but in a very sort of limited way, really. You brought out things I hadn't heard before. That story, for instance, you tell, I found incredibly moving when you found the little frog and you put it outside because it was like you.
I had never heard that story.
No, and I don't know how, if you...
When we that day we were shooting the interviews, and she said, "You know, I'm going to tell you something I've never told anyone." And I thought, "Oh, finally!"
It's. I mean, if I can.
I was ashamed of not eating the frog. Yes, because all the others. I mean, we were so hungry that we had to eat anything that was passing. I thought a rat, a mice, or a mouse, or a snake. It couldn't go around. It was taken and eaten. It was horrible, but it was necessary. Hunger. That's why I felt guilty not to kill this. So it was a tradimento, no? Betrayal. Yes.
I'm still hearing stories which are not in the film. It opened up so many things in the family. It's actually ongoing, I think, for us. Yeah, I had to close it at one point. Actually, the interviews you see are, I think, the third ones we did, because I wasn't happy with the previous ones. And that time I said, okay, this is it. We have to really do it here. Because I think it was difficult to get to this point.
There's obviously moments which are unlocked for you. The one that stands out for me is when you found the Japanese girl who's 2 years old, and you realized that was like your mother.
But, it's difficult to put everything in, but I was in tears because we came down and we see these children, and I should have said it. Every time you go, oh, I should have put that in. I saw a little girl who was Dacia's age, Yuki, and my mother. So it wasn't just my mother. It really was the children, innocence. What was taken away from them there was there for me to see. Life goes on. And what was really incredible, and I don't know if anyone caught this, but my mother says, there was a nice policeman and he gave Yuki a potato. So when I came down and saw the children, the little boy came, and so we had 3 girls, right? And then the boy. And this little boy came over with a potato because his mother had just done the food shopping. And he came over to us and said it in English. And that was incredible. It was really magic for me. It was like, okay, so the reconciliation is happening. This is something that, and I'm glad I went back a second time. I wouldn't have had this the first time. The first time I went there, I thought, what am I doing here? My mother's not here. What am I doing? We don't have a film. This is not happening. But somehow it did.
And then the place had been destroyed completely. And I was there with my father before he died. And it was a tennis court. But nobody knew that it was a concentration camp. Nobody knew. And we were asking the people. Nobody knew. And the house has been destroyed. So it was very difficult. We found it because there was a tennis court.
Fosco remembered the street.
Yes, but I mean it was completely different. Completely different.
And the memory of being removed.
Yes,
It
complete.
only the journalist.
Yes, that's right.
Point. Yes. Because he was doing a story in Fosco.
Yes.
And that's the only reason why.
Well, I went to find him because I was curious to talk to him and understand why how he found out about the story, first of all, and why a Japanese man would want to make a documentary about Fosco. And of course, it was wonderful because he had this footage of, Katsuya, and you see him running away and saying, "I'm an old man, I don't remember." That was Valentino, and you see him like, yeah. And so yes, I must say, we in Europe and even here, just the importance of memory and memorializing a place. So, in Europe you have the plaques and some names or that say, here this happened. There was nothing there. And I still have this secret wish that somehow, my secret wish, to somehow find a way to donate a little playground, because there was no playground there. Those children live there. They're children of people who work for this big company, and that's their dormitories. And I thought it would be great to give them a little playground in the name of the three children, of the three of them, and say this, right? Another Kickstarter campaign. I just want to say this. It's very important to remember the wonderful thing about Topazia telling the story, and Dacia and my mother are now the only two survivors from that camp, is that after 80 years to 100, you have to go to the history books. You don't have, that eyewitness account, which is why what Spielberg did with the Shoah Foundation is so brilliant, because simple people, anyone, you don't have to be, just stories. Stories should be remembered, oral history.
I think we should open up. Yeah. Yes, I think we should.
There is a microphone going around, so there you go. The gentleman back there.
Was the temple...
We wait for the microphone.
I can...
No, but we need it for the recording.
Of recording. Was the temple still function? Did the temple function as a temple when you were incarcerated there?
No, partially, not all, because we were there. But yes, they used it as a temple, not for the public.
No, but they had orders not to speak to you, if I remember correctly.
Yes,
so
there was a separation, but they were still living there, and they have come si dice, delle services, yes, but separated and not for the people. The people couldn't come. But they were.
What you see, of course, is the renovation. It wasn't like that at all.
Yes.
Can you wait just for the microphone just for a second? We need it for the recording. Thank you.
Bagheria in inglese.
Quando?
C'è.
There is a translation of Bagheria. Yes, it's called Bagheria.
It was on the New York bestseller list, actually, in English.
It was
on New York Times. But
first published in English and then
In England.
C'è.
Yes, sì, c'è, credo che c'è anche su Amazon.
Amazon.
Grazie.
Thank you. The gentleman
Behind you.
You asked before about the style of the filming with the screens and whatever. I had the incredible...
Is this Tony?
Hi, how are you?
Hey.
I had the incredible advantage of meeting Grandma when she was 90.
My mother.
No, I know
Grandmother.
Tony. I'm talking about your grandmother.
You did?
Yes, I was with Dacia. She was at the dinner table as well. Your mother and I.
In Rome.
There were about 10 people in Rome. And I got there too early. Naturally, I'm an American, so I have no idea about time. And I also stopped at a wine place and brought 3 bottles of what later, when they opened it, was the worst wine I've ever tasted in my life.
Bad thing to do with my grandmother.
Right. To this day, I've never gotten over that idea. But what I want you to know is that at the moment I met her, since she had to entertain me before anybody else arrived, she opened up an art book and showed me a picture of herself as a young Sicilian princess. And what you have to understand about this family, yes, Italy, yes, Japan, yes, all kinds of politics, art. They are art personified. From the beginning of Fosco and his wife to the end. Mujah still is to this day, and of course, so is Dacia. It's good seeing both of you. And
Nice to see you.
I have to say, the moment I saw Fosco, I almost fell off my chair. He is Daniel to a T.
Oh, thank you.
To a
Thank
T. Thank you for the film. It's great. I've got to go. I'm driving 2 hours.
I haven't seen this man in 15 years. No, 10 years maybe.
Well, I'm glad I was here.
Goodbye. Thank you.
I was just curious, how did your daughter respond to the film?
My daughter?
Yeah, and the follow-up question was, how do you feel like the burden or the weight of history affected you as opposed to her?
So I have a son as well, whose name is Fosco, actually. So I'm wondering why you're asking about my daughter or both? Both. Okay, okay. No, because it's interesting because, you know, my daughter comes from a family of a lot of women. So how did it affect them? They loved it. They were part of it, and they're
There is a moment in which you
see them. They're part of the reason I had to make this, and I feel that they don't have the burden, which I did. I did. My sister, my cousin Yuki's daughter, maybe bears the burden more than anyone. And what was the?
Yeah.
Their reaction is very healthy. It's they're very proud of the history, and so they have that distance. They're in it, but they also have that distance. I think it was very healing for all of us, and although they don't really know that, they just kind of, it's light for them.
You must say that the father of her children is an American.
To add to the complication of the internationality of the family.
He died, but he was a very important actor and wonderful man.
Yes. And actually was the first one who encouraged me to do this. And so he's also part of the reason this got made.
Thank you for the film. I was just hearing you talk about, or being asked about your children. I was thinking about what you were saying about memory and about, I'm a psychoanalyst, and I was thinking about this through the lens of the intergenerational transmission of trauma.
Yes.
I was thinking about my father, who's Italian-American, who fought in the war along with my uncles, who never for 40 to 50 years talked about the war, ever. And it wasn't until probably towards most of their deaths that my cousins and ourselves would start asking about it. So I started watching the film. I was thinking about how we become the containers of memory through different generations. What a generation can hold. What you can hold as a storyteller that this generation could not tell because they were too close to it. I was thinking about Freud, who had to be escorted by his own daughter from Vienna during the occupation by the Nazis, and would never ever write about it. His daughter would, Anna would, but he never would talk about it. And now even in Germany today, young people are starting to talk about the Holocaust in a way that their fathers, mothers, and grandparents could never talk about it. So there's something about the containership of different generations that you could tell the story for them in a different way.
And you must. And we have a responsibility. Yeah. We owe it to them.
So brava.
Grazie.
Do you have other questions? Yes.
Thank you very much for the movie. It was fantastic and wonderful. I have a question about the other 18 families that were with you. Do you keep 18? 18 persons.
They were the only children, and my grandmother was the only woman.
Oh my God.
And this is something I feel sorry about, but you know, in 75 minutes, there was only so much you can talk about, and if I followed the other storylines, it would have been very difficult, but and I'm sorry we didn't talk about, maybe that's a sequel, about the other, but they were all men.
Do you keep friendly with them? Did you keep in touch with them?
Oh yes,
after
there
the war?
was a great solidarity. Sometimes, you know, my mother tells the fact that we children, we didn't have the right to have any kind of meal, nothing.
Food. No, they
rice,
didn't have a
nothing.
ration.
So it was forced, they were forced to give us a spoon of rice. So sometimes they looked at
They resented it.
Yes, they didn't like that. So my mother said, we will do it, we will give her. But it was, no, they have a law. It was this sadistic law inside the camp that all the others had to give us this little spoon of rice, you see. That sometimes this was creating a situation of tension, yes. But for the other things, we were usually very, very near, very, how can I say, solidary, yes. And for example, my father and the other three were the younger, because the other were older. And for example, they once they decide to steal something in what was called a sort of a, they call it chiesino.
Chiesino, the little church they called. They had code words where they hid the food,
which was closed.
where the soldiers
But
hid
they-
the food.
So
they had these whole operations.
No, because really we were dying of hunger. So they took the key and they went up, and in the night they from the window they went down and they opened this little closet, and so they took something, not much, but something, not to make it clear that they were stealing something. And my mother said that at a certain moment there was a bag of beans, and these beans all around, and there was a terrible noise of beans. And so the Japanese policemen woke up, and so they made a terrible scene, and they made another key, a special key, and so we couldn't do it anymore. But it was, I remember my father telling this, and he said that we couldn't do anything else, but they were laughing because it was so strange in the night to hear the beans going all around the camp.
There are many, many stories.
Many stories.
The one actually,
details.
One of the men who came to the camp and then disappeared again was the Petacci's husband.
Yes.
Right? Do you want to tell this story?
No, I don't.
Allora, there is a book. Unfortunately, it's not translated in English, but Topazia's diary was published in Italy, and it has also an interview. She and my mother talk about this, and that's where I learned about it. So Mussolini, as you know, had this lover, and he decided to send her husband to Japan from Italy, and he ended up in the camp. And then he disappeared again. But yeah, he was one of the people.
I don't know how, but I can't.
Can you imagine? I mean, he wasn't in Japan. He was shipped over there from Italy because he wanted the lover's husband out of the way. He was with them.
A strange way of dealing with lovers and ex-lovers. There's the story of Ida Dal Ser, that was the mother probably of his son, the only male son that he had. He had her locked up in a psychiatric institution. There is the beautiful film by Marco Bellocchio, Vincere. It's an extraordinary film that we presented here.
Can I say something?
Yes, absolutely.
Vincere was rewritten by Deborah Belfort de Furia, who co-wrote this with me. Yes.
So there is a connection, of course.
Vincere is a beautiful.
It's an extraordinary film.
Very important film, yes.
With Filippo Timi that plays both the son and the young Mussolini in an extraordinary way. We presented it here several years ago. Are there any more questions from the public? Yes, back there. I think we can take a couple more.
Since we're talking about Mussolini, I just thought it was ironic that the first money my grandmother ever made, but he bought her self-portrait, and with that, she bought a car, freedom.
It's symbolically, it's incredible.
But this was very early.
You mentioned that when your parents independently did not sign the libretto, I thought I heard you say that they really didn't understand what the consequences of that would have been. I'm wondering, during the time that you were in Japan, did they ever regret that decision?
Well, they knew because they told them. They told them that if you sign, you will be free. If you don't sign, you will be in a concentration camp. So,
you bear the consequences.
sì, vabbè, insomma, comunque they knew that they were a prison or a concentration.
They knew that something bad would happen to them.
Yes.
Not the details.
Not
the
details,
rats
no,
and
yes,
the
yes.
snakes.
Right,
and-
right. So,
Yeah.
But naturally, sometimes they discuss. I remember, for example, being awake in the night, listening to my father and my mother discussing about what it has been a choice, a good choice or a bad choice. Not a bad choice, but too dangerous, specifically for the children. We were 3 children. But once, maybe you don't know this, I don't know if you know, that once the Swiss, you know that, the Swiss embassy, they arrived to say, well, if you want, we can take the children. And then they said that maybe they could put these children in a come si dice, boarding school, orphanage.
The Red Cross had
So the orphanage for the for the children. And my mother said, no, they will stay with me, and if we die all together. And you know what happened to that school? They died, all of them, because it was bombarded, and they died all. So she had been really...
We wouldn't be here.
Yeah, we wouldn't be here.
We have time for one more question, if we have it. Well, then, I really think we should thank... no, before I have one question, Mujah, because I know that this, it's quite remarkable, but this was Mujah's first film, and to me it's of a level of refinement, and aesthetically, the photography, everything works so well. You are not thinking of not doing more films at this point. You must be thinking of doing something else.
You said
Tell
it was
us.
my first one.
Yeah.
Which means there will be more.
But it's
it
also,
took so long; it had to be
but it's
decent.
but it's also very
Otherwise,
it's very hard act to follow, because you made this film because you felt like compelled inside to tell the story of your family.
well, you know,
So
the first thing
what
they
can be
tell you
next?
in film school is write about what you know. So, Dacia wants me to tell you that we started the project with a Kickstarter campaign. So she was very happy about that, because
It's a way of democratizing
because
film
I-
production. We are all for it.
Yes. Well, that was the beginning, because it took a lot more after that. That was for...
Yeah.
It's true, to find someone to produce a first...
Of people, absolutely. And so what is next? What can come next in terms of topic?
Well, you have to write about what you know.
Okay.
Right? The next one is fiction. And I was widowed young, and I parented as a widow. So it's a love story about loss and transformation, and that's what I know about now.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Dacia Maraini and Mujah Maraini-Melehi. Thank you so much, David Forgacs.